Second of all is a handout that we've used in the past. It's an hourglass figure. And the idea here is that there is head knowledge, there is life knowledge, there's head knowledge, there is heart knowledge, and there is life knowledge. Now, head knowledge is the stuff you get out from books. Heart knowledge comes from experiencing Christ as our personal Lord and Savior. On the Emmaus Road in Luke 24, the disciples who had seen and heard everything Jesus did after he died and before he was resurrected were walking down the road really downhearted, and Jesus opened the scriptures to them and showed them from the law and the prophets how everything had to come about the way it did. Experiencing Jesus is a kind of what's known as a depth. If this is an exegesis, which is just figuring out what the original writer meant, what the original reader would have understood, then at the heart level, this is understanding the scriptures in terms of Christ. And then at the bottom, we have life knowledge. So life knowledge is like the things that happen when we get together for fellowship, for Bible study, when we are in prayer, when we're reading the scriptures. The first level is information. Then formation is the heart. It narrows it down. And then what pours into the bottom is transformation. And that's a key concept that I try to use, because what we're doing in here is mostly at the information level, and then some of our understanding is naturally going to filter through formation, and the goal is to enable transformation in our lives. Because if we don't have the right knowledge, no amount of work is going to make a difference. The sand has to pour down through to the bottom to make a difference. And then at the very bottom, I mentioned that, addictive or compulsive behaviors, the sin that so easily besets us, what James talked about, the double-minded man, unstable in all his ways, who looks at his reflection, seconds later forgets what he looks like. There is you can have a trapdoor at the bottom and you lose the sand. And so the goal is to not only fill up the top and keep the heart open and let it fill out, but to try to close the trapdoors at the bottom. This is the shadow of the cross. This is an elaboration of the middle part of the hourglass. It basically shows how if you have the sun here and the cross here, the shadow of the cross falls over the Old Testament. And this is what Jesus was doing when he walked with them on the Emmaus Road and opened the scriptures to them. One of the next key concepts here, we talk about some similarities between the Old and New Testament. You've got the first 5 books in the Old Testament that are, the books of Moses. Then you have the historical books, the poetic books, and then the prophets. In the New Testament, you've got the 4 Gospels and Acts, you've got the church letters, you've got the pastoral letters, and you've got the Hebrew letters. And I've actually elaborated on some similarities between Old and New Testament, but that's not what this session is about. Tonight we're going to focus on the foundation and the core, the inner part of this diagram and the foundation, which is the Gospels. In the session after this, we're going to talk a little bit about Luke-Acts, because they're actually 2 volumes of the same work. Tonight, we're just going to talk about Luke in terms of being a gospel. The next session, we're going to talk about Luke and Acts together as a unit, and it's going to help us see how we move from Christ's ministry, death, and resurrection to the forming of the church. But tonight, we're going to stay strictly in the 4 Gospels. As far as the timeline goes, we did an overview on the Old Testament. This is a timeline for the New. Israel kind of ended up under new management a couple of times. The Assyrian tribes wiped out the 10 northern tribes. And then after that, in 586, Babylon took Israel into exile. And things were never quite the same after that. We had the rise of synagogues, which is actually a prototype of our church. Persia was then taken over by Greece. And then the same territory, Rome ended up occupying them. We ended up with a Greek translation of the Old Testament, which got very popular and spread out with Greek culture and became very critical in Acts. But for now, just kind of be aware that Christ's ministry shows up after 4 separate empires had been ruling in Israel. And so the idea of a traveling teacher or even somebody who started a movement, that was not uncommon at the time, which really shows us to some degree the historical validity of what we're dealing with. So that kind of brings us to the present.